Welcome to the Fort Kent Historical Society Museum Complex located in Fort Kent, Maine. The complex has 5 buildings, the first of which is the Bangor and Worcester train station, built in 1902. The second is one of the oldest houses in Fort Kent. The Diggle Doobie House was built in 1839. The third is the Doobie Barn, which had been built in 1860. The complex also includes a replica, built in 2010, of the Washington School. The last building is the former Bangor and Aroostook Railroad freight shed that has been converted into the Paul D. Thibodeau Visitors Center.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming again to the Fort Kent Historical Society, Paul D. Thibodeau Center. This year for 2020, we were really excited for our exhibits this year, partly because we were closed last year and we were unable to have any because of the pandemic. But this year we opened up with exhibits that we tried to call a cultural renaissance of Fort Kent and appreciating things that were distinctly and colloquially Fort Kent. So this our second exhibit this year was about quilts that were made with remnants of material from Princess Kent, the pajama factory or clothing factory we had here in Fort Kent from the 1950s to late 2004. So starting in this section, the company belonged to Lloyd and Bernadeen Dunne. And they initially came to Fort Kent during World War II, and they started on Main Street, where Gas and Go is now. There was a large car garage there that had belonged to Auguste Ouellet. And in the early 1940s, the beginning of the war, they converted it to a potato dehydrating plant for the war effort. They would produce 5-gallon tin cans with dehydrated potatoes that at the front, they could just add water and then cook and get them ready for their mess, their meals. So that factory, it employed a heck of a lot of women because most of the men, of course, were gone to the war effort. So the women that worked there were definitely the support staff of the whole war effort. And they were here on the home front working to make sure as a team that the war would be won. So after the war was over in 1945, the Dunnes converted the factory to make potato sticks, and which was very, very popular, and that went till 1947, until March of 1947, when the whole plant burnt. So this is a photograph, so like with all great stories, they usually begin with a tragedy, but the tragedy for the Princess Kent story was in the beginning, in 1947, when the original Featherweight Foods burnt down. So Featherweight Foods was located right where Gas and Go is now. And there's just a couple buildings left that are recognizable. This is the ambulance service, which was the Willite Garage at the time. And this was Albert LaBelle's house, which was torn down just a few years ago to make the entrance for the park. So 1947, the plant burns. Mr. and Mrs. Dunne went to Connecticut and worked there for a few years, trying other new ways to earn money. But in 1950, they returned to Fort Kent, and they rented a building here on Main Street that was formerly the local people called it the Green Front, but it was the Maine State Liquor Store. And that building, they had built another store in town, so the Dunnes rented that building, and they started Princess Kent in there, and they primarily at the beginning made children's clothes out of cotton, and these clothes were embroidered. This is an example of one of them, the only one we have in our collection. And it's just a small little girl's dress with an embroidery of a dog. So the Dunnes, like I said, they really, especially after World War II, where a lot of women had been employed at Featherweight Foods, by 1950 there was a demand for female employment. And so they moved here and they had quite a bit of employment from not just, they had males and females that worked there, but for the ladies it was something that empowered women a lot, that they were able to have their own incomes, or they were able to have disposable incomes for their families to buy like the extras that they needed. So, and they did have a second shift in the evenings for Princess Kent, where a lot of high school boys and girls worked there for money to go to school, to get married, for hope chests and things like that. So it was really a great employer for our area, and extremely lucky to have. These few quilts here are quilts that are made from that cotton style material that they initially introduced in the 1950s. So we got quite a variety, and it's cotton, so it's material that's really easy to work with. But as you can see, there's giraffes and zebras, and here there's French poodles. So typical 1950s, 60s style to them. The company in the early 60s moved to Camille Daigle's place, which is the former Doris Cafe and MPG building, and now Nene's restaurant. They moved there in the early 1960s, and they continued to make the cotton clothing until they were bought out or sold. The Dunnes sold to a company from North Carolina, which kept the name. But in 1967, they changed completely the types of materials they used. They went to sleepwear, and then they turned the material was now fleece. So, and that's what we were noticing with the quilts that we had started to pick up from our area, because we noticed there were all these fleece blankets that were made with remnants from the material that were at Princess Kent. And we just thought that it's something that everybody had. Everybody had in town. You know, my grandmother, who made this quilt here, my grandmother's name was Teresa Bouchard Pelletier. And in her spare time, she would purchase bags of remnants from the factory, and she'd make quilts for her children and grandchildren, and she probably made way over 100 in her lifetime of these kinds of quilts. These done are a few other pictures I wanted to show for the early years. I have one here too. And this young lady is showing off some of the dresses and other things that they made there. This is a photograph of the inside, and you see where all their pieces are kept on top. And then again, this young lady here is probably inspecting. So by 1967, they switched to the sleepwear. And these are examples of some of the sleepwear pajamas that they made. And those pajamas were quite well known even in this area because of the feet. The little plastic feet on the bottom, which I myself used pajamas like that when I was growing up. So that's exact same. So these quilts, they started again in 1967 using that kind of material. And then the company expanded in the 1970s, 1976 actually. They moved to a large building in the Fort Kent Industrial Park that was created specifically for Princess Kent. And that building, I believe, they expanded 4 times. So for company-wise, they had up to 400 employees at one time. So, and that was employees not just from Fort Kent. There was quite a few from Clare. There was quite a few from Madawaska, Grand Isle, St. Francis, Allagash. So it employed a heck of a lot of people, and it was a great opportunity too if you were a very ambitious and a very fast worker, fast and efficient worker. You were able to make more money because it was paid by piece rate. So you had the minimum piece rate to make in order to earn minimum, but if you were quicker, you could earn that much more money. And people at the time were making pretty good, great money. So these are, again, some of the quilts that we have. These are photographs that were taken inside of the new building in the early 1980s. And we've got ladies working on the machine. This lady is putting on labels on the boxes. This gentleman in the background and this gentleman here was a Mr. Colburn, who was the manager from the North Carolina company, and he would come to Fort Kent on occasion because he really enjoyed this factory, and he always had really nice compliments on the workforce that he had here in Fort Kent. So in 1986, the Princess Kent part of that corporation from North Carolina was sold to Gerber. Gerber, the large baby food and baby company, they purchased it in 1986, and they continued with the sleepwear. These are for a few more other examples of some of the Princess Kent sleepwear. This is again some of the early material that they were using at Princess Kent in the sleepwear. The material apparently, I've been told, is very, very hard to work with. So there's very differing limits in patterns that are available or patterns that were tried. Like this one is around the world. So it was hard to work with, but it was definitely something that kept us warm here. And that's ironically the title of the exhibit is They Kept Us Warm. And like I said, we always considered it was something that was uniquely Fort Kent, was these. So this here is the new building that was built in the 1970s. And initially it was just this one building here, but then they built an addition and then a later addition. So it was expanded extensively. So after 1986, when Gerber took over, they continued to expand. So this down here is a little interesting. These, I believe, are pajamas that were made, PJs rather, that were made just at the cusp of the buying of the Gerber purchasing it. This was made, and as you can see, I don't know if you can pan in here, it's still got the original Princess Kent label. But this one, also in the same material, the same style, and they put a Gerber tag. So we believe that these two things were made just about the time of that merger. Don, this table here is set up with remnants, fleece remnants from the Princess Kent factory, and we got a pretty neat pair of pea shoes here that were made, the bottom soles were made from leftover material from the feet of the pajamas. So they were able to recycle and create new shoes with those. And something else I wanted to point out, Don, was these are some of the patches. And these are especially, I believe, from the late 1960s, early 1970s, that were used on some of the PJs for like boys' pajamas. And we've got some for girls. We've got Little Miss Muffet here. So then even some for snow. We got a snow bunny and a little glider sled. So these were the patches that were put on the pajamas after they were sewed and all cut and sewn and put together and then inspected. And then finally, after everything was before packaging, they would put on the label or put on the patch, depending on what company they were either working for or making the pajama for. So Don, we have some more here after the Gerber people came in. Of course, they were using modern colors and modern ideas and modern. So the material changed, or the colors changed pretty significantly. They went into more brighter and neon colors. And these quilts here, along with the PJs, reflect that. We know that these pajamas were made right here in Fort Kent because of the labels were cut in half. Because the factory did have an outlet store where they offered seconds, irregulars, to the public, so you could buy them much cheaper than they would be in the store. So finally, Gerber ran from 1986 to about 2002, and it closed. And then a company with 4 people and the former manager of the company, Peter Burnett, they bought the building and all the equipment inside and started something similar to the Princess Kent, almost the same thing what they were doing. It didn't work too well after a while, and it closed again, and then it reopened as Creative Apparel, which Creative Apparel belonged to the Passamaquoddy Indians from Washington County. And they had a contract to build or to make Kevlar suits for the Navy. And they did that until, makes about 10 years now, I think, that they've been closed and the factory's been shut. And so it was an end of an era about 10 years ago for when Princess Kent, or the whole companies that made up Princess Kent, were finally closed. An unfortunate day for here in Fort Kent, and something we're still missing. But we did notice, like I said, that every time I go somewhere and see quilts, 9 times out of 10, if it's made here in Fort Kent, it's made with remnants of Princess Kent. So that's what we enjoy, and so we've collected these quilts, and then also collected the story of the company, because it is within somebody's recent memory. We could post pictures all day on Facebook and on our sites of photographs of Fort Kent 100 years ago, and we don't get too many hits. But if we focus or put something on there that's within people's recent memory, like their mother worked there or their grandmother worked there, so we find it's much more successful. And it does give us an opportunity, while these people are still with us and still alive, to collect their stories and collect their photographs and collect their things for our museum. So a few years back we had done a square dancing exhibit, and unfortunately there's 4 people that were in that group that had helped us for the exhibit then that have passed away. So we would have lost that, and that's what we kind of like. We always try to show things that would interest people from Fort Kent. So we thought this quilt show would be really good. And finally, if anybody is interested in joining the Fort Kent Historical Society, you can visit our Facebook page, which is Fort Kent Historical Society. Or if you'd like, our address is Fort Kent Historical Society, P.O. Box 181, Fort Kent, Maine 04743. Primarily, folks, we stay alive because of your financial support, and we really appreciate all your help in this. And we will get that much better if we're able to have continued support. So we thank you very much.